Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm very excited to finally be filming a video I have wanted to put out for quite a while, and that is a recommendation video for adult science fiction books. Now, I have already done a video on my channel where I recommend where to start with science fiction, and that was put out several years ago. I do stand by all of those recommendations, so I'm not going to have any repeats on this list. If you are brand new to the genre, I do recommend checking out that video after watching this, but these are going to be some new recommendations, and I'm going to structure this video in a way that I'm really excited about, and that is starting with recommendations for beginners, moving on to recommendations for intermediate science fiction readers, as well as some recommendations for those of you that consider yourself to be advanced or really comfortable in the science fiction genre. I hope that you all enjoy this formatting and find it helpful as a way to navigate through science fiction, which a lot of you tell me can be a really intimidating genre, and I understand that. So all that being said, let's get into the books. First, let's start at the beginner level, and these are science fiction books that I would recommend to someone who has never read adult science fiction before, or maybe have only read one or two and are still kind of wading into the waters and just aren't very comfortable with it yet. These books are all really accessible, and the first one I want to recommend is Star Nomad by Lindsay Buroker. This is the first book in the Fallen Empire series, and this is a piece of space opera, and if you don't know, I consider space opera in general to be a really good place to start when it comes to science fiction, because it tends to be more focused on the adventures and the characters rather than the hard science elements. And I've actually done a whole video recommending some of my favorite space operas, so I'll have that linked down below as well. But this book particularly follows a woman who was stranded on a planet at the end of a war. She was a rebel fighting against an empire, and now that the war is over, she is trying to get off that planet and back to her daughter who she left behind. She ends up teaming up with some unlikely friends because they all have the shared goal of getting off the planet. Those other people include a cyborg who actually fought on the other side of the war. And so this book involves a lot of character tension, also a little bit of romance if you're into that. Now, while this is the first book in a series, these books are all relatively short and really easy to binge through. The writing is very simplistic and easy to understand. Sometimes space opera books can be a little bit bogged down by the politics, but that's not the case here. Instead, it's really about following characters, and the themes in the story are really universal to our times. So I think that even if, again, you haven't read any science fiction before, you'll just be able to fall in love with the characters, enjoy a fun, exciting plot, and be able to just go along for the ride and kind of dip your feet into the genre. So definitely want to recommend. In general, space opera, again, is a really good place to start, but this one particularly I found to be really easy to get into and just a very immersive, fun experience. Now, staying within the beginner category, I also want to recommend Planetfall by Emma Newman. And this is set in a future where a group of people have followed a woman who is known as the Pathfinder off to colonize another planet. This Pathfinder had a vision of a future, and followers that believe in her and believe in her vision went along with her. The story is told from the perspective of a young woman who was one of these early colonists, and she has a secret about the beginnings of this colony that we as the reader do not know, and that secret is devastating. And when a mysterious man shows up in the colony, he threatens to unravel and uncover that secret. Now, this is one of those science fiction books that I like to recommend to those of you that also enjoy an element of mystery, because like I said, we as a reader know that the character is purposely holding something back, and we just don't know what that is. I found this book to be very compelling, and like the last book I mentioned, this one is very character focused, which again is something that I think is a really good thing when it comes to getting into science fiction, because while a book might be set in space, set in the future, anyone can relate to really good characters, and Emma Newman does incredible character work. There is some great diversity. The main character is a lesbian person, and she also has some mental issues that she's working through. I don't want to spoil what that is, but this book has some really complex characters. They are not perfect, but very realistic, and definitely people that you will be drawn to. So if you are someone that likes character-driven stories, this is definitely one to check out. It's technically the first book in a series, but they're actually companion books, so you can pick up this one and get a complete story. The other books are set from different perspectives, and they're all loosely intertwined, so you really should start with this one, but I do recommend continuing on with the series. I also like the fact that this book is set in a near future, but it does still reference Earth and our solar system because they left Earth to go to this other planet. So it just feels a little more understandable as opposed to books that are set in such a far future that Earth is no longer a entity in the story. So I think this one is very compelling. It does have a lot of mentions of some science and technology, but it's very easy to understand because it's just really extrapolating technology we already have today. For instance, the main character works in the colony as the person that does all the 3D printing, and we already have 3D printers, so it's pretty easy to understand what is going on in those scenes. So definitely recommend this one of my favorites, and the whole series is definitely worth checking out. Now, moving on to the intermediate category, these are books that are still fairly accessible, but I just wouldn't make them your first science fiction book. They don't do as much hand-holding, and I think that they're better to read once you've read a few of the beginner recommendations first, either from this video or my previous one. The first book I want to mention at this level is Repo Virtual by Corey J. White. And this follows a man who works as a repo man, but really he's more of a high-end thief. And at the beginning of the story, he gets a job that he can't say no to because it pays too much. And that is to steal something that turns out to be an artificial intelligence from a billionaire. I want to recommend this book for a few reasons. First, the fact is that a heist story is a really common narrative, especially for those of you that read a lot of fantasy. I think you'll be very familiar with the tropes in this one, and so it's just a narrative you understand. It just happens to be set in a future with new technology, and this one does lean towards the side of the beginner category. I almost put it in the first level, so it's kind of a good transitional book because it's not overly complicated. Again, it's more about the heist than these complicated technological terms and all of that. But the reason I want to put an intermediate is that it really doesn't hold your hand. This world is very interesting, but it's described in a very organic way, and you just learn about it as the characters are navigating through this city. And in this city, I like the world building because there is a virtual overlay that makes this city look like this clean, gorgeous corporate paradise full of advertisements. However, in the actual world, there is a lot of poverty and crime, and the city itself is actually very gritty. And I like that counterbalance. I think it works really well and was just really interesting to read about. I also like that this book incorporated a piece of artificial intelligence. It's something I really enjoy reading about in science fiction, and I think it's something that attracts a lot of people to the genre. But again, this is kind of introduced in a more natural way, so the author doesn't spend a lot of time explaining the ins and outs of it. So the author does expect that you have read books about artificial intelligence before, and I like that this book has some great diverse representation in it, including some queer characters and characters of Korean descent. So it's not so North American focused, and just overall a really good story, a lot of fun. It is a standalone, so that might be a plus for you as well. So this is a complete story, and I don't believe there are any plans to continue on because it really does have a finite ending to it. So definitely another one I recommend. Also in the intermediate category, I want to recommend Seven Eves by Neil Stephenson, and this is set in a near future where right at the beginning of the story, the moon explodes in a cataclysmic event that will cause the Earth to soon become inhabitable. And the story is about how Earth and humanity has to react in order to basically save us and continue on the legacy of our planet. The story is told over 3 parts, and this is advertised on the back of the book, so no spoilers here. In part 1, we get to see how the different governments react and the planning stage of how they intend to continue on humanity. The second stage is following the survivors that were able to leave Earth as they head off to a new habitable planet. And the third part actually jumps 5,000 years and follows the descendants of humanity in more of an anthropological way, getting to see how our descendants have grown and changed from the legacy that they are continuing on. This book also has some major time jumps, which can make the narrative a little bit harder to follow. You do get to spend some good time with the different characters, but then again, you jump ahead in time and are introduced to new characters, so you have to get reattached to them. So this book can be a little bit jarring. I definitely wouldn't recommend it to beginners, but if you are, again, getting your footing in the genre and are feeling a little bit more confident, I think that you'd be ready to pick this one up. I did this one on audio, which I do recommend because the narrator did a great job. And it was a very fascinating story that really just explored what we would do in this future. And again, I like that this book is set in a closer future so that I think, it's a little more easy to understand because it's not that far away from the present day. And again, just a fascinating story, one I definitely recommend, and it was an interesting read for sure. Now we are officially at the advanced level for recommendations, and these are books that I would only recommend to those of you that feel really confident in the science fiction genre, that consider yourselves to be adult science fiction readers already. And I'm sure someone is going to comment saying that these books aren't that complicated and there's more difficult ones out there. And I'm sure that's true. But from my own experience, these are actually two books that I tried reading years ago when I was first getting into the genre, and they were too much for me. I'm happy to say that now that I feel like more of a seasoned science fiction reader, I was able to go back and enjoy both of them. And I would just love more people to check them out. But again, just don't start here. The first book I want to talk about is Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie. This is the first book in a trilogy. This follows a great empire that goes around colonizing different planets and annexing them. Once they colonize a planet, they take the local dead corpses and turn them into what they call ancillaries. And these are living corpses that are controlled by the mind of the AI ships that do the colonization. And this story particularly follows one person named Breck, and they're an ancillary that for reasons was separated from their ship years ago and are now on a revenge quest. Now, this book definitely belongs in the advanced category because it has some really complex world building, and the author does not hold your hand at all. At the beginning of the story, you meet Breck, but it takes a while before you fully understand what they are trying to accomplish. And it just is a book that will slowly reveal things to you. It's told over two different timelines, one being the present day when she is off on her mission trying to get revenge, and then also jumping back to the past and giving you the pieces of what led her to this state. And I found this book to be very complex and very compelling because I like the mystery behind it. But this is actually a book that I've read twice, and I definitely got a lot more out of it the second time around because it's very dense and there are no info dumps. Instead, the story is told very organically. And so there's a lot of things that I didn't quite understand the first time, and it wasn't until I went back and reread it, knowing more about the story, that I was able to get more out of the larger narrative. The author also does some really interesting things with gender because the main character really doesn't have a concept of what we consider to be male and female. So instead, they simply just call everyone female in this book. And that can be a little bit jarring because there's times where someone is being called a she, and then when they are described physically, they seem to actually represent as male. And I like the fact that this book challenges a lot of our gender norms, and I think it's very topical for today. So lots to digest in this book, lots to read and comprehend and consider. And it's a very thoughtful book and just, again, one well worth reading. But would I recommend starting here? Absolutely not. It's a book you definitely want to work up to, and it's well worth the reward when you get to the point of being able to appreciate this one. So definitely recommend it if you haven't yet and you are a science fiction reader. You should definitely get on it. Now, the last book I'm going to talk about is definitely another advanced book, and that is Nine Fox Gambit by Yoon-Hae Lee, which is the first book in the Machineries of Empire trilogy. And this is a hard science fiction military story that centers around a captain who agrees to have her body tethered to the soul of a dead general. He was a brilliant tactician, but also possibly crazy. He was known for never losing a battle, but he was also known for being willing to kill his own soldiers in order to get the job done. She is a little bit nervous to link up with this person because he will have some control or influence over her mind, but she wants to do this because she's determined to win the battles against her enemies. And when I say that this is a piece of hard science fiction, I mean hard. There is a lot of technical jargon in this book, and it's really not explained at all, at least not at the beginning. There is some really interesting technical aspects to this book. This book involves a lot of math, specifically geometry, and it also involves a really complex calendar system. And even as I'm mentioning this to you, there were parts of that story that I did not fully comprehend, but at the same time, I found it to be very compelling. I really enjoyed the parts of the story that involved them discussing strategies, even though they, yes, probably went a little bit over my head. Like the last book I mentioned, this is one that would definitely benefit from a reread because there's a lot to digest and decompress in the story. But in terms of a unique story, this is something that I've never read before. It felt very fresh and new. Now again, while I didn't fully understand all of the technical aspects of this book, I still found it to be an incredibly immersive read just because the general in this story is such a complex, morally gray character that is just fascinating. He is just not a simple person to unravel, and I just found myself wanting to know more and more of his backstory. So there is a really good character piece at the center of the story, but there is a lot of military and technological jargon around it. So again, one that you should only pick up once you're really confident in the genre, but I do recommend it. It's definitely complex, but it's well worth it, and I would just love to see more people reading it. So that is it for this video. Again, let me know if you found this helpful because I would really like to do another recommendation video structured like this. I actually have already done this for the fantasy genre, so if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to have it linked down below. And let me know of the books I mentioned, which ones are you planning on picking up, and what level do you consider yourself as a science fiction reader, because that will help me to gear these videos better to my audience if I know if you're new to the genre or read science fiction all the time. I do read a lot of adult science fiction on my channel, as well as fantasy, horror, and thrillers, so if you haven't yet subscribed, please consider doing so. I do a lot of recommendations like this. Otherwise, if you already watch my videos, thank you so much. Drop a comment, give me a thumbs up to help those YouTube algorithms, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss another video. Thank you so much for watching. I will talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.